Evelyn Carter rested her palm against the warm metal of the taxi door before stepping out into the dense Atlanta heat. The sun had only just slipped below the horizon, leaving the sky washed in deep orange tones, the kind of evening where the air felt thick enough to cling to your skin. For the past 2 weeks, she had been in rural Alabama, sleeping upright in an old recliner beside her mother's bed, afraid to close her eyes after her mother barely survived a sudden medical emergency. Now everything had changed. Her mother was finally stable. Doctors were no longer speaking in hushed, cautious tones. For the first time in days, Evelyn allowed herself to breathe. Today meant relief. Today meant home. She rolled her suitcase across the polished marble floors of Crestview Towers, the luxury high-rise she had shared with her husband, Nathan Pierce, for nearly 10 years. It was the place where they built routines, traditions, and what she believed was a solid life. The building still looked the same, glowing softly under the evening lights, familiar in every detail. When the elevator reached the penthouse floor, Evelyn let out a quiet exhale, comfort washing over her. This was where she belonged. She lifted her key fob and tapped it against the digital lock. A sharp beep sounded, followed by a red light. Confused, she tried again, pressing the fob more firmly this time. The same red signal flashed back at her. Something felt wrong. Perhaps the card had demagnetized. She pressed the doorbell and waited. Moments later, footsteps approached from inside. The lock disengaged and the door opened. Nathan stood there wearing a silk robe she had never seen before. His face was unreadable, his eyes distant and cold. On his neck, unmistakable and fresh, was a dark maroon smear of lipstick. Without warmth or concern, he remarked that she had returned earlier than expected. Evelyn felt her stomach drop as she asked why her key no longer worked. Nathan replied calmly, explaining that he had the locks changed. Before she could even process what that meant, another woman appeared behind him. She was young, polished, confident, and dressed in Evelyn's favorite satin robe. With a smug smile, Lauren Whitmore remarked that it was surprising to see the ex-wife standing there. The word ex-wife cut straight through Evelyn. Nathan stepped into the hallway and pulled the door shut behind him, leaving Lauren inside the penthouse still smiling. He explained flatly that their marriage was over and that everything inside that home, every dollar and every asset, was legally his. He reminded Evelyn that she had entered the marriage with nothing and would be leaving the same way. The hallway suddenly felt colder than the night outside. Evelyn stood frozen as Nathan motioned for building security. He instructed them to escort her out. And in that moment, Evelyn Carter lost her home, her marriage, and the life she thought was secure. She exited the building in a daze as the glass doors slid shut behind her with a soft hiss. The night air felt sharper now. Traffic roared somewhere in the distance, but the sound reached her as if she were underwater. She gripped the worn handle of her suitcase tightly. It was the only thing she still possessed. She walked aimlessly through the glowing streets until she reached a small bench near Centennial Park. Neon signs from nearby restaurants reflected off the pavement. Laughter drifted through the air. Couples passed by, walking hand in hand, everyone seemingly anchored to a place or a person. Evelyn felt completely invisible. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she had not eaten since breakfast. She opened her wallet, hoping she had remembered incorrectly. Inside were a few old receipts and a single crumpled bill. $9. It was not enough for dinner, not enough for a motel room, not enough to solve anything. With shaking hands, she pulled out her phone. The battery icon flashed red, showing 5% remaining. She opened her banking app and waited for it to load. When the balance appeared, her heart sank. 0. Every account she shared with Nathan had been drained. Even the small savings she had kept from before the marriage were gone. He had taken everything. Panic crept in, cold and suffocating. As she searched her wallet again, something caught her eye behind an old photo of her father. A faded debit card. The plastic was scratched, the logo barely visible. Memory stirred. Her father, Richard Carter, had given her that card the day she left for college. She had been 18 years old, full of plans and certainty. He had told her to keep it only for emergencies, to never touch it unless she truly had nothing left. At the time, she did not understand why his voice had been so serious. That night, his meaning became painfully clear. She had nothing. No home. No money. No husband. Only a forgotten card and the memory of her father's steady voice reminding her that anchors exist to keep you from sinking. By the time the sun rose, Evelyn found herself walking toward an old stone building tucked between newer office blocks on a quiet side street. Heritage Federal Bank. She remembered coming here with her father as a teenager. It had seemed outdated back then. This morning it felt like her last chance. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of paper and dust. Only 2 tellers worked behind the counter, and 1 employee sat at a customer service desk. The quiet felt heavy. Evelyn approached and handed the worn debit card to the young man seated there. His name tag read Jonah. He greeted her politely and asked how he could assist, though concern flickered across his face as he took in her tired expression and wrinkled clothes. Evelyn explained that she needed to check the balance on the card, admitting that it was very old and that she no longer remembered the PIN. Jonah turned the card over in his hands, surprised, and noted that it appeared to be nearly 20 years old. He added that he was not certain the system could still read it, but she quietly asked him to try. He nodded and entered the numbers printed on the card. The computer emitted a short beep. He frowned and tried again. Another beep followed. He mentioned that it was unusual and suggested the account might be archived in their legacy system. After accessing a different database, lines of green text scrolled across the screen. Evelyn held her breath. Then Jonah suddenly stopped typing, his eyes widening as he stared at the monitor. The color drained from Jonah's face so quickly it startled her. In a voice barely louder than a whisper, he asked her to remain exactly where she was for a moment. Before Evelyn could ask what was wrong, he hurried toward the office tucked into the corner of the lobby and knocked several times in quick succession. A tall man with silver streaks threading through his dark hair stepped out. The brass nameplate on the door read Samuel Whitaker, branch manager. His posture was rigid, his expression already impatient as he asked Jonah what could possibly be urgent enough to interrupt him. Jonah gestured toward the monitor with an unsteady hand and explained that this was something he needed to see immediately. Samuel approached with visible annoyance, but the instant his eyes landed on the screen, his demeanor changed. Confusion crossed his face, followed by shock, then something close to disbelief. He looked from the screen to Evelyn and back again. Carefully, as if choosing every word, Samuel asked whether she was Evelyn Carter, the daughter of Richard Carter. She confirmed it, her voice cautious and unsure. Samuel released a heavy breath, gathering himself, then told her that they needed to speak privately and that the bank would have to be closed for the conversation. Evelyn felt her pulse quicken. Whatever this was, it was far beyond anything she had imagined. Inside Samuel's office, the door shut firmly behind them, and the blinds were drawn as though the room needed to be sealed off from the rest of the world. Evelyn sat across from him, her heartbeat loud in her ears. Jonah stood near the wall, silent and tense. Samuel explained in a low voice that her father had left her something far more intricate than a simple savings account. The card was connected to a master account that controlled an entire corporation. Carter Heritage Holdings Limited Liability Company, founded in 1999. Evelyn struggled to process the words. Corporation made no sense. Her father had been quiet, practical, a man who sold farm equipment and managed a modest stretch of land. Nothing about his life suggested corporate ownership. Samuel turned the monitor toward her. The screen displayed rows of documents, including property deeds, investment portfolios, and legal records filed under a folder labeled Inheritance Activation. He explained that her father had spent more than 20 years quietly building farmland assets, agricultural business shares, and long-term investments. The account included a safeguard clause that only activated once her personal balance reached absolute zero. That moment had occurred the day before. Evelyn stared at the screen, speechless. Her father had prepared for this. Not for betrayal itself, but for the possibility that one day she might be stripped of everything by someone who underestimated her. Jonah handed her an envelope, explaining softly that her father had left it specifically for her. Inside was a handwritten letter. The familiar script tightened her throat as she read his words telling her not to cry, not to shrink, and to build something of her own. He reminded her that trust was not meant to be given to those who would break it, and that what he left behind was not a gift, but a second beginning. Evelyn folded the letter carefully, her hands steady now. The fear that had gripped her earlier cooled into focus. She looked at Samuel and asked what steps were required to activate everything immediately. She walked out of the bank that morning with a folder of documents under her arm, and a clarity she had not felt in years. She still had no home, no husband, and no money in her personal account, but she had something far stronger. A foundation her father had built quietly, patiently, and with intention. Now it was her turn to build upon it. Her first decision was to disappear. She purchased a prepaid phone and chose a new number. She paid cash for a simple outfit at a nearby store, and checked into a modest hotel under a different name. The anonymity felt unfamiliar but freeing. Nathan would not be able to track her or interfere with what came next. After a hot shower and a proper meal, she studied every document Samuel had provided. Ownership structures, business filings, land valuations. The scale of it all was overwhelming. She knew she would need guidance from someone who understood how to convert dormant assets into real leverage. The following morning, she entered a sleek glass tower in Midtown to meet the man Samuel had recommended. Daniel Cross was known in the financial district as the architect, a strategist capable of rebuilding companies from the ground up or dismantling them entirely. He looked up when she entered, studying her with calm, measured focus. He told her she had 10 minutes and asked directly what she wanted. Evelyn placed the folder on his desk and explained that she was not there merely to survive. She intended to claim what was hers and understand the full scale of it. Daniel reviewed the documents, his brows lifting slightly as he recognized the scope. He explained that the assets were substantial, including farmland shares and long-term instruments that had multiplied in value. Evelyn told him she wanted the company rebuilt, every asset reviewed, every contract modernized, and every opportunity explored. She also made it clear that she wanted to learn every step of the process. Daniel observed that most people with wealth preferred shortcuts, but she explained that she had lost everything the day before and would never allow that to happen again. For the first time, he smiled faintly and agreed that they would begin immediately. The following 2 weeks became relentless. Evelyn spent long days in conference rooms studying financial statements and land surveys. She learned how her father's farmland tied into broader agricultural networks and absorbed knowledge about contract law, oversight regulations, and investment strategy. Her mind sharpened quickly, no longer dulled by years of complacency. Daniel noticed the change and remarked that she was not simply learning but transforming. Evelyn knew he was right. She was no longer the woman who waited for approval or begged for honesty. She was becoming someone her father would recognize, capable of carrying the weight of a legacy and shaping her own future. While Evelyn rebuilt her life piece by piece, Nathan Pierce was celebrating what he believed to be the beginning of his most successful season. He and Lauren treated the penthouse like a stage, champagne bottles lining the counters as social media filled with curated images. Nathan boasted openly about a new development project he claimed would secure his place at the top of Atlanta's construction scene. One evening, Nathan stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, swirling a glass of wine with confidence. He told Lauren that a massive stretch of land in southern Georgia was about to open for development, explaining that whoever secured the construction contract would dominate the region. Lauren was hardly paying attention. She lounged on the couch, angling her phone to capture photos of herself in a designer outfit Nathan had just purchased. Without looking up, she murmured that it sounded wonderful and asked whether that meant they could finally start planning their wedding in Miami. Nathan brushed the question aside with a careless wave of his hand. He explained that there would be time for that soon, but first he needed investors with serious financial power. He mentioned hearing about a new presence in Atlanta, someone acquiring property with cash, moving quietly but decisively. As he snapped his fingers thinking aloud, he named Carter Heritage Holdings, noting that the company had recently purchased a mansion in Cascade and was likely interested in joining the next development surge. Lauren glanced up, puzzled, and asked who that was supposed to be. Nathan dismissed the question, saying it did not matter. What mattered was getting a meeting. If he presented the project correctly, he was confident they would fund him. He believed they had no idea who he was yet, but that would change soon. What Nathan did not realize was that everything he dreamed of acquiring was already under Evelyn's control. The land he coveted was part of her inheritance. The company he planned to charm was the one her father had built, and the one she had just brought back to life alongside Daniel. Within days, Nathan instructed his assistant to contact Carter Heritage Holdings. He practiced his presentation repeatedly, imagining praise and admiration. When the reply arrived, inviting him to present in person, his confidence soared. As he adjusted his tie in the mirror, he told himself that someone had finally recognized real talent. The reality was far removed from his fantasy. The invitation was not admiration. It was the opening move in a trap Evelyn had designed with precision, one he would walk into willingly. Nathan arrived at the Cascade Mansion certain the world still revolved around him. The iron gates opened slowly as his car rolled down a driveway framed by towering oak trees. He had no idea the property belonged to the woman he had discarded weeks earlier. Inside the foyer, an assistant greeted him formally and informed him that the chief executive officer would meet with him shortly, asking him to wait in the library. Nathan repeated the title to himself with satisfaction. Whoever this investor was, he intended to impress them completely. The library was grand, lined with towering shelves and anchored by a long mahogany table. At the far end sat a man reviewing documents on a laptop. Nathan assumed he was the chief executive and offered a confident greeting. The man responded coolly, clarifying that he was a consultant and instructing Nathan to take a seat, explaining that the chief executive would arrive soon. The tension in the room thickened as minutes dragged by. Nathan adjusted his tie repeatedly, attempting to steady his nerves. Then the doors behind him opened. He heard the sound of heels first. Measured. Certain. Each step cut through the silence with intention. A voice apologized for the delay, and Nathan recognized it instantly. He turned slowly, his breath catching as he saw Evelyn Carter standing at the head of the table. She looked nothing like the woman he had dismissed. Her posture was straight, her hair sharply cut, her presence commanding. She wore a navy dress that projected authority rather than apology. Calm, controlled, unshaken. She introduced herself formally as the Chief Executive Officer of Carter Heritage Holdings, and thanked him for attending. Nathan tried to speak, but no words came. His mind raced, searching for an explanation that did not exist. Evelyn invited him to begin his presentation, noting that he seemed eager to discuss development on land owned by her company. Nathan swallowed hard, struggling to believe what was happening. Daniel watched him with restrained amusement. As Nathan stumbled through the opening slides, Daniel interrupted, pointing out inflated figures, incomplete risk analysis, and unrealistic cost projections. Sweat formed along Nathan's neck as panic crept in. He attempted to shift the conversation, suggesting they speak privately and claiming it was all a misunderstanding. Evelyn leaned back, her expression unreadable, and stated calmly that there was no misunderstanding. He had asked to meet the chief executive officer, and she was seated right in front of him. In that moment, Nathan understood the truth. The rules had changed and he no longer controlled the game. While Nathan left the meeting shaken and disoriented, Evelyn and Daniel were already advancing to the next phase. They had no intention of investing in his company. Their goal was ownership, and they knew exactly where he was vulnerable. Nathan had built his business by relying on small independent suppliers, borrowing materials and labor while delaying payment for months, sometimes longer than a year. These vendors were too small to pursue legal action, and too financially strained to fight back. Many endured the losses in silence, knowing one missed payment could close their doors. Daniel presented Evelyn with a detailed spreadsheet listing 12 suppliers and total outstanding debt of approximately $450,000. He remarked that these people deserved better. Evelyn agreed, adding that Nathan deserved the consequences. Daniel revealed that he had already created 3 shell companies, all registered in Delaware, designed to be clean and untraceable. Through them, they would purchase every outstanding debt in cash. Evelyn approved the plan and instructed him to ensure every vendor understood they were being paid, because someone finally valued their work. By the end of the week, Daniel and his team traveled across the region, meeting each supplier in person. Every invoice was paid in full with certified checks. Some business owners cried, some embraced them, others stood frozen in disbelief. Meanwhile, Nathan enjoyed the sudden quiet. No missed calls, no angry messages, no demands for payment. He interpreted the silence as submission and bragged to Lauren that people finally understood who they were dealing with. The truth was far different. Every debt he owed now belonged to Carter Heritage Holdings. Daniel returned to the mansion and placed the completed transfer documents in front of Evelyn, confirming that the process was finished. She traced her fingers along the top page, fully aware that the company that had drained her for a decade was now slipping into her control. She did not want revenge fueled by bitterness. She wanted accountability, and she now held leverage Nathan never anticipated. When Nathan requested dinner, Evelyn accepted, even though every instinct told her his sudden warmth had nothing to do with love. She arrived at the upscale restaurant where he had once proposed. The scent of truffle butter and polished wood lingered in the air, but the memory felt distant, almost unreal. Nathan stood quickly, pulling out her chair as if they were still married. He ordered the most expensive wine, speaking rapidly, filling the silence with excuses. He claimed stress had driven his actions, insisted Lauren meant nothing, and blamed loneliness while Evelyn cared for her mother. Evelyn listened without reacting, her expression perfectly neutral. Then she asked calmly whether he was suggesting that everything had been her fault. Nathan rushed to deny it, his voice eager, defensive, and uncertain. Nathan insisted that he had simply lost direction and claimed that everything could still be repaired, rebuilt, and restored if they worked together again. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her expression composed, and explained that personal emotions needed to remain separate from business decisions. She said it would be best to complete the investment discussion first and instructed him to come to her office at 10 o'clock the following morning with his full company ledger. Nathan left the conversation visibly relieved. In his mind, the agreement was already secured. The following morning, however, the atmosphere inside the mansion felt noticeably colder. Daniel stood beside Evelyn, 3 thick binders stacked neatly on the table. Evelyn greeted Nathan formally and stated that they could begin. Daniel opened the first binder and explained that it contained a detailed list of outstanding debts owed by Pierce Construction. There were 12 suppliers with a combined total of $450,000. Nathan frowned and insisted that he was already negotiating with those vendors, claiming they were willing to wait. Evelyn met his gaze steadily and explained that they were no longer waiting, because every one of them had already been paid. Nathan blinked in disbelief and asked who had covered the payments. Evelyn clarified that Carter Heritage Holdings had done so, meaning that the debt now belonged entirely to her company. Daniel slid the second binder across the table and explained that it contained the debt transfer deeds, all legally binding. The color drained from Nathan's face as he insisted that he could repay everything if given more time. Evelyn told him calmly that he had exactly 24 hours. If the full amount was not repaid within that time frame, his penthouse, office equipment, and all remaining business assets would be seized. When Nathan repeated the deadline in shock, she confirmed it without hesitation. It was the first moment Nathan truly understood that she was not bluffing. The next 24 hours dragged him across every corner of Atlanta. He slept little, ate nothing, and drove from bank to bank and office to office, begging for assistance anywhere he believed his influence still carried weight. But influence evaporates quickly when collapse becomes visible. By midday, the first banker rejected him outright. By mid-afternoon, 3 former partners refused to answer his calls. By evening, his remaining contacts blamed travel, family emergencies, or conveniently lost signals. Word was spreading. Nathan Pierce was no longer considered a safe investment. Back at the penthouse, Lauren paced the living room, gripping her designer handbag as though it could somehow protect her. She accused him of lying and demanded answers. Nathan shouted back, his voice raw with exhaustion, insisting that he only needed time and claiming Evelyn was bluffing. Yet deep down he knew she never did. At exactly 10 o'clock the next morning, the doorbell rang. Nathan opened the door with shaking hands. Daniel Cross stood in the hallway alongside 2 attorneys and a county officer holding official documents. Daniel informed him that the deadline had passed and explained that they were there to enforce the lien. The officer stepped forward immediately and began placing seizure notices on the walls. Lauren watched in horror and cried out that they could not take their home. The officer explained calmly that the property now stood as collateral for a debt owed to Carter Heritage Holdings. Nathan made one final attempt to plead for more time, insisting that he could still fix everything. Evelyn was not present. She did not need to be. Her signature was already affixed to every document. Within an hour, Nathan and Lauren were escorted out of the building, dragging suitcases filled with whatever personal belongings they could gather. The same security staff who once greeted them warmly now avoided their eyes. Standing on the sidewalk, Nathan stared at his reflection in the glass tower he once called home. For the first time, he understood the real cost of taking everything from someone who had nothing left to lose. 2 weeks after the penthouse was seized, Evelyn sat at the long table inside the mansion's meeting room. Afternoon sunlight spilled across stacks of blueprints, financial reports, and updated land assessments. Daniel stood beside her, reviewing the final liquidation documents from Pierce Construction. Daniel confirmed that all assets had been processed, the penthouse cleared, the office equipment sold, and the funds transferred. Nathan Pierce no longer had any holdings connected to his former company. Evelyn nodded quietly. What she felt was not triumph but closure. The end of a chapter that should have closed long ago. Daniel asked what she wanted done with the penthouse keys. Evelyn tapped her finger lightly against the table as she considered it, then explained that everything inside the unit should be sold. She specified the furniture, the appliances, the decor, and anything else left behind. However, she made it clear that the apartment itself was not to be sold. Instead, she instructed Daniel to deliver the keys to Samuel Whitaker at Heritage Federal and ask him to offer the penthouse as a staff reward, ideally to someone who worked hard and rarely received recognition. Daniel lifted an eyebrow and remarked that Jonah would be deeply grateful. Evelyn allowed herself a small, genuine smile and explained that Jonah had been the first person to treat her with dignity on the worst day of her life, and that kind of humanity deserved to matter. With that decision finalized, Daniel opened a new set of blueprints and introduced the next phase. The designs showed rows of modest modern homes, a small medical clinic, a community school, and walking paths weaving through pecan groves. Evelyn explained that this was what she wanted to build: clean, stable, and affordable homes for the workers on their farmland. She reminded him that many of those families had been harmed by Nathan's unpaid contracts and had supported him for years without protection. It was time, she said, for someone to finally support them. Daniel studied her quietly and observed that this no longer resembled revenge. Evelyn corrected him, explaining that it was not revenge at all, but repair. She turned to the next design, which revealed a large training center with classrooms and small business laboratories. She named it the Carter Academy and described it as a place for farmers, small business owners, and anyone who needed a second chance. She explained that her father had built his life from nothing and would have wanted others to be given the same opportunity. Daniel closed the folder thoughtfully and told her she was building far more than a company. Evelyn replied that she was building what she once needed herself: a place where people would not lose everything simply because they trusted the wrong person. Outside the window, farmland stretched in every direction, calm and green beneath the late afternoon sky. Her father had once called it an anchor, but now Evelyn understood its deeper meaning. Anchors were not only meant to hold you steady, sometimes they were where entire kingdoms were rebuilt. 1 year after the day Evelyn stood alone on a sidewalk with $9 and a worn debit card, the world around her had completely changed. The farmland her father left behind was no longer dormant, but alive with workers tending crops, families settling into new homes, and students walking into the Carter Academy carrying notebooks filled with possibility. Standing on the hill where her father once spoke about resilience and forward paths, she understood that losing everything is not an ending, but an opening. If you are hearing this story, remember that you are allowed to begin again, allowed to rise, and allowed to build something stronger than what was taken from you. Share where you are watching from, support this channel, and stay connected for more stories about strength and new beginnings.